Hello and welcome to the NextPowerUp impressions of Vector 36. This is an early access title on Steam at the moment, hence the impressions instead of the full review. So what we're going to do is very similar to a normal review, except instead of saying, hey, this game is wonderful, hey, this game is awful, we're just going to go through everything and explain some of the lighter and some of the darker details. Fortunately, I have actually been in contact with Red River Studio throughout this week about all of my impressions, and so far all of the negatives that I've been talking about are either being looked at or are intentional or are just part of a design decision. So that's pretty nice. So if you do read the review and you fortunately see this video, it is worth noting that most of those things that I've written in the what didn't impress us are actually being sorted out anyway, so don't take that as oh, there's more on that red box than there is on that green box, therefore it's a terrible game. Unfortunately, that's not really how reviews work. So we'll just go ahead and jump into this anyway. This is a hard physics-based racer game. A lot of people commonly misconcept that even a word. This for Star Wars Episode 1 Racer or something like that. And I guess you could kind of describe it similar to that. But at its real core, it has this slight dashing of Episode 1 Racer, quite a large heap of Kerbal Space Program physics in there. But for the most part, it's just its own game. I mean, there is no other game like Vector 36, I can guarantee you that. Even F-Zero, just the way that these skimmers control and the way that you customize things, it's just not the same. And I think the only way you have to play it to understand it. After playing it for the last week for like 20 or so hours, you just know, you understand how Vector 36 feels in comparison to other races. This isn't an on rails or on tires racer. This is very much a case of I'm going to apply velocity in that direction while skidding in that direction in order to go around. It's quite complex and it's hard to get your head around initially. So first up, it is a challenging game. It is genuinely challenging, but with challenging comes a great sense of achievement when you do win. Now, the thing I noticed with this game was when you're doing the tutorials, you get given a low to mid-range skimmer, which is relatively nice, quite fast. But when you're actually racing, you get given this skimmer that is basically a floating lunchbox, as I referred to it in the review. Now, it's really slow, it's really clunky, it can take quite a beating, so you don't get full effect of the damage system unless you really bugger up quite hard. And to be fair, the early game is a total nightmare. It's really bland, really boring, really repetitive, because you've got this really slow, not particularly maneuverable skimmer that doesn't even look particularly pretty. And you've got two maps which are quite basic and very much the same, and you end up playing those maps over and over and over again because it requires a lot of money to buy new things and progress into the new leagues. And so for these first 2, maybe even 3 hours, you'll be bashing your head against the wall while trying to get over the speed bump. But I would like to mention that despite the fact that the early game is boring and bland because of the slowness and because of the simplicity of the tracks, it has to be. This is quite a hard game, and so in order to break you into the way that Vector 36 handles movement and acceleration and how maps work and how damage works, it needs to give you a gentle introduction, and that's what this soapbox skimmer thing is and what these simplistic maps are. They are there to introduce you to the game's mechanics, introduce you to how crippled you are going to get as you play through this game and constantly fail because physics is hard. So it's a very hard game, and because of that, the early game is it's quite dire, but it has to be, otherwise if they gave you one of the mid-range skimmers straight off and said, hey, race around this track in these tiny canyons and enormous great crevices you've got to jump over, you'd fail even more miserably and you'd probably have an even less great time. So it sucks, but it has to. Without it, you probably not enjoy yourself too much. The bias system is actually quite a cool concept, although the way it's implemented at the moment is a little bit troubling. So basically, bias works by working on a scale of 0% to 100%. 0% means I'm going to go up that way. 100% means I'm going to thrust that way. So what this system does is at 50%, you are cruising along nicely, a few meters above the ground and producing a decent amount of sideways thrust. If you increase that bias, you'll go lower to the ground and you'll speed up a hell of a lot. And a lot of this game is about managing that bias, managing whether you need more lift or whether you need more thrust in order to try and beat out a competitor that you're trying to just slide past at a slightly faster speed at the cost of possibly crashing into a rock on a not so level surface. So the bias system is an awesome concept, let down by the fact that for most of the maps I just had my bias set to 55-60%, and I managed to either win or just crash and not care at that 60%. So I didn't really change my bias much. There is a bias jump function which blasts it straight down to 10%, which applies tons of thrust to the bottom. And this is used as a buffer, so if you're jumping over a large canyon, or if you're coming across an area and coming down quite hard, you can use that bias to quickly drop it down to 10% and create a bit of a cushion so you don't smash into the ground. And that's pretty cool. It just slow you down, and it showcases what the bias function can do. So in an ideal world, this game would have you messing around with that bias constantly in order to get a decent trade-off between speed and lift, but at present it doesn't seem to matter all that much. And the way that you change bias with the two right buttons is a bit finicky, to be honest. It needs to be able to change in bigger increments than as it is at the moment. It just feels a bit like a pain on a controller. The other thing is the damage system. Damage system is really cool. So everything has durability. You can damage parts by crashing into something and the part will come flying off. Some robots will then come, you'll stop your skimmer and they'll have to weld it back on, and it might be damaged or it might be okay. So damaged radiators don't cool the engine when you're boosting. Damaged vertical thrusts can sort of be on the blink, literally. So you'll have 3 even ones and one that's constantly going off, so you'll find yourself sort of tipping forwards and backwards. So the damage system is quite cool. It's pretty in-depth, it's well made. And if you do severe amounts of damage, then that part will be gone and you'll have to either just carry on or quit. Except that's where the negative lies. The damage system is pretty brutal. At this stage, if you accidentally crash, you may as well just quit the race and go on to the next. You can survive a tiny mistake. If it's one part that's come off, and it's come off close by and the robots are nice and quick to put it back on, you might be able to recover. But anything beyond that, you may as well just quit because you've lost. And so the damage system is good, but it's too crippling at this point to in order for players to enjoy it as a concept. At the moment, if you crash, you hate the damage because you've just wasted 10 minutes of your time racing around and you have to start all over again. So it's cool, but it's not quite cool yet. The other thing is the maps. Now, hopefully you'll see a nice different variation of maps on this video. The first 2 maps are a bit bland and boring. As I said, they have to be so that you get used to the racing thing. But some of the future maps, as you progress through the leagues and get better skimmers and get faster and get better times on certain maps, you'll unlock more maps. You'll unlock reverse maps. You'll unlock nighttime maps. Bizarrely, a lot of maps are named similarly but are different. They'll just have different routes around a large area that's sort of been sectioned off. And the maps are pretty cool. They're very varied. They vary in difficulty, vary in look completely. And they really do test your skills, as if the rest of the game didn't do that already. So the maps are pretty well done. Obviously the texturing on the maps is not fantastic, but the texturing on the actual skimmers is pretty great. So it sits very neatly between a AAA and an indie title in terms of graphics. They're reasonably good. They're pretty good for a small studio like Red River. Video options are limited to 1080p and 2 slider things, which is not great at the moment. There's nothing above 1080p support. You can set it to stretch to 4K, but there's no point really. The customization is something I want to touch on quite deeply because there's a lot of potential customization, but physics gets in the way of the customization. It should, because this is a physics-based game. So this is a physics-based racer, and that's the whole concept of this. It is designed to be like a scientific racer that's awesome, and you have to manage your thrust and manage your balance and center of mass and center of lift and everything like that. And it's great. And customization is awesome because you can buy a load of parts and put them wherever the hell you please. But you can't because you're within the confines of physics. You need a decent center of mass, sensible center of lift, and just decent thrust in order to win. And also, you're currently limited by quantity. At the moment, there's about half dozen, 6 or so upgrade parts in each section. Only 2 ECUs, only 1 cockpit, 5 chassis, but everything else there's usually about 6 of. So you've got 6 thrusts, 6 power converters, 6... I can't even remember the name of half the parts, to be fair. 6 radiators, I think there's only 3 gyroscopes, but you get the idea. There's quite a small amount of different upgrades, and it's early access, so you can't complain about the content at the moment. But the customization would be even more awesome if they add more chassis, if they add more parts, a bit more diversity for you to really get in there and customize the crap out of everything. This isn't a game of he who has the biggest numbers wins. It's a case of he who manages those numbers in a very smart way and utilizes them around the corners wins. You can very easily defeat a slightly better, technically faster skimmer just by playing well and the AI playing badly. The other thing is, it's a bit annoying that you have to buy the skimmers if you want their chassis. If you want just the chassis, you can't just buy just the chassis. You have to buy the whole skimmer outright with all the parts it comes with, sell all the bits you don't want, and then buy the ones you do actually want. So that's a bit of an annoyance. So the customization is potentially massive because you can change the X, Y, and Z axes of placements of everything, but you are confined by content and also by physics, which is fair enough. This is a science eraser game. Confining it to physics is okay in my opinion. The other thing is the sense of speed in this game. Now, as I said in the beginning, the start of the game is quite boring because it's quite slow. Whereas once you, literally the next skimmer up you get, everything changes. Now, the main selling point of this game, I think, is going to be the fact that in first person, the sense of speed is awesome. And when you're racing around those tracks at those speeds, it feels fantastic. In third person, that's not really the case. It feels quite slow. But the speed in this game is 100% relative. The speed you're going is the distance you will travel in-game distances. So you can't say, oh, this isn't 200 miles an hour, because in-game relative terms, it is technically that amount of distance in time. So in the early game, it feels quite slow. In third person, it feels quite slow. But in first person, it does feel pretty good when you're that low to the ground, and when you're getting lower and lower and lower, everything feels faster and a little bit more dangerous. And I can only imagine how awesome this is with VR goggles. I think that because this game is designed with VR as a purpose in mind, coinciding its release with virtual reality headsets, I think if you play this game with a VR, the whole thing, this game is just going to make sense suddenly when you have it on your face and you're looking around your cockpit and racing. I think when that happens, when someone suddenly plays it with a virtual reality headset, everything's going to make a hell of a lot of sense. The other thing is science. Plenty of science. There's a nice little testing method. You got thrust, you got weight management. So if you weight things slightly oddly, your thing is going to tip side to side or veer onto one side. If you don't manage your thrust vectors correctly, then you're going to end up nose diving into the ground or producing too much lift, so you end up slowing down. There's a lot of science for you to get your head around, as well as heat production and dealing with that. So that's quite cool. Science is fun. It's hard in this game, but it's fun in the end. You just kind of have to spend half an hour or so getting used to the way that the customization works and how to make a skimmer that flies, basically. As I said, the third person does feel a little bit slow, but that's just a case of relative speed. As you get bigger and better engines, bigger and better power converters, speed will feel faster. And I imagine when the game slowly progresses, you'll have more parts to make yourself go fast. And so third person will be a bit more interesting. Unfortunately, third person, the UI is not so great. All it has is the ranking system where opponents are in first to eighth or whatever. So I have spoken to the developer about a lot of these things I've mentioned that are not so great, and most of them are being fixed. And as I said, third person is being sorted. He is doing a UI for that so that you can get readouts here, there, and everywhere. So it's a problem at the moment, but it's not going to be a problem for particularly long. The other thing is the user interface. At the moment with mouse and keyboard, it's okay. It could be better. But on controller, you can't really see where your cursor is. It's highlighted with blue. But it's still, traversing the UI, the main menus with the controller doesn't feel right. Considering this game is coming out on consoles and I've been playing it mostly with my Xbox controller, not being able to use the UI with the controller kind of feels like grinding your teeth a bit too much. So UI with the controller needs work a little bit. The other thing is the AI. Very often the AI is really awesome at going around corners, but terrible at jumping over canyons in some cases. So I think the AI is good in areas, terrible in others. It just needs fine-tuning. The other thing that annoys me is quite often in races, you have anywhere between 4 and 8 opponents. I would like to see more opponents in general, because you'll very often find yourself going around this enormous map and never coming into contact with another living entity, which is a bit annoying. I'd quite like to have that pressure kept on the player all the time at these speeds, with this danger that's constantly around that you might crash into something and fail catastrophically. But at the moment, because there's so few opponents and it's such a large map, you very rarely see other things. So I'd like the opponents to be just slightly higher, like maybe a 20 opponent racetrack or something like that. The other thing that affects the fact that you never see opponents is that in almost every single race, every single league, most of the opponents will have a skimmer similar to you. Some of them will have a colossally worse skimmer if you're in like an 8 opponent race. They'll have like the beginner skimmer while you're in a mid-range one. And then there will be someone at the front who has the top-end skimmer who will absolutely trounce everyone. Now, if this is adjusted correctly, now with most opponents, they are in a similar craft to you. They have some slight different upgrades. They have some slight different placements of where they've put these upgrades. But for the most part, they are almost evenly matched. And so you have a reasonably decent time of staying with a few opponents. But for the most part, the slow ones lag behind and get lapped constantly, and the fast ones, there is no chance of you ever catching up with them unless they literally crash, or the AI is so crap that they boost around a corner at infinity speed somehow, and then spin out of control. So the only way it's balanced is because the AI is bad. So once the AI is fine-tuned, I'd then like to see all of the opponent skimmers to be slightly more balanced and all on par. Obviously, there are leagues where there is no entry requirement skimmer. You can literally enter some leagues with any skimmer that you like, but the odds of you winning are nil, because most of the time there is a one of the end game skimmers at the very front, and they're always going to win unless they careen into a canyon and explode. So all in all, there are a few nuances that need to be sorted out, but rest assured I have spoken to the developers, and most of the things I've mentioned here today, they are all being looked at. Some of them are being looked at right now. Obviously now is the optimization period, so our performance analysis in the link below is going to be representative now, but in a couple of months everything might change, performance might increase significantly maybe, but some of the negatives in terms of gameplay, like the third person UI and all of that stuff, it is being looked at. Obviously content is going to be added as the game progresses through early access, so I may have mentioned a lot of things I didn't quite like or things that need to be tuned or tweaked, but I have been told that they are being worked on anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about, this guy said there's quite a few odd things wrong with this, it must be a bad game. Just because the red box is bigger than the green box doesn't mean that an early access game is necessarily terrible. Systematically speaking, Ark is an awful game in terms of performance, but very popular for obvious reasons. So yes, the red box in our review is slightly bigger, but most of the things are being worked on, and it just does feel like a good game. I feel like virtual reality is going to do this game a lot of favors, and it's been designed for that very purpose as well. So just once all of these little bits are sorted out, and once there's more content, more maps, more upgrades, I think this is really going to hold its own, and it's definitely going to be one for virtual reality buyers to take a look at if they want. I feel like this game is going to make the best option for a racing game on the virtual reality headsets for the moment. I haven't seen any of the newer ones, because just driving a normal car on a racetrack is probably not going to be as cool as flying a skimmer that close to the ground and just things being that tense. So I feel like this is going to really shine when it comes to virtual reality. So as usual, you can see the full written review. It's probably one of the longest I've written actually, in the link below, as well as the performance analysis, which may not be representative for too long because it is, after all, an early access title. You can join us on Saturday for our next week in gaming essay, and of course next week on Thursday for our next review. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.